Hey, everybody. This is Nevin Gusak, your host of the Populist Patriot. Um, just wanted to do a couple of live streams. The first one I wanted to do is my favorite podcasts, specifically political podcasts. Well, there are a few. Number one, I quit my cable TV service because first of all, much of the network news sucks. CNN or Clinton News Network is Clintonian neoliberalism. So forget it. Sometimes they'll have good articles, obviously, on their website. They'll have some good stories, but I haven't watched CNN, at least on a regular basis, since at least 2008, which was when Lou Dobbs was fired. When Lou Dobbs was on CNN, he was terrific on a lot of fronts. He was a critic of financial deregulation. He sounded the alarm on the increased power of communist China. He was skeptical of immigration, and I would argue not really so much from a xenophobic standpoint. He was more skeptical of immigration from the point of how it was an exploitable slave labor force or slave labor program used by white-skinned employers to to undercut American workers and to enhance their profits even further. He was a very staunch critic of free trade agreements, as I mentioned before, financial deregulation, and many other things. He hit both the Republicans and Democrats on the corruption of campaign finance structures that we have today, et cetera, et cetera. And when Lou Dobbs joined Fox, he just basically became another Republican shill, essentially, which was very sad. So this is the last time I watched CNN was when Lou Dobbs was on. Fox News is a disaster. They hate working people. They're a bunch of labor haters. Rupert Murdoch, it's well documented, is tied in with the Chinese Communist Party. You have some of their, quote, fiscal conservatives being supporters of outsourcing to communist China, like Eric Bolling, for example. Fox News represents pretty much, especially on the economy and politics, everything I oppose. It's like basically listening to Xinhua or New China News Agency or RT, for example. It's just the political ideologies is just so diametrically opposed to both my personal as well as my political values. Fox News is garbage. MSNBC, corporate, liberal, SJW type of channel. They had some good people on like Ed Schultz and Crystal Ball. They were good on issues related to trade and economy. Ed Schultz was, before joining RT, he was very tough on Putin. He was very tough on communist China. He was a left populist. He was patriotic. At least he wore, so to speak, on his sleeve the American flag. He dressed up his populism in Americana. Ed Schultz was really good. But unfortunately, because he covered the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade agreement, and he was also a vocal supporter of Bernie Sanders, MSNBC, just like corporations will do what corporations will do, and they're behind them are larger corporations like General Electric and others. They got rid of him. They basically showed him the door, just like they did with Crystal Ball. And unfortunately, corporate media does this all the time. And some of these people like Chris Hedges or Ed Schultz will end up in shows, in programs like Russia Today or RT, which is an arm of the Putin dictatorship. And why? Corporate capitalism is basically suppressing these voices and they have nowhere to go. Great job, corporate capitalism, driving people to the forces of the anti-American camp. Terrific job. Regular local news, the last time I watched them on a regular basis, years ago, I just got sick and tired of watching these animal cruelty and child abuse stories and baby left in a dumpster. That kind of stuff just gets my blood boiling. So I just can't deal with that. So that is why over a year ago, amongst other reasons, I just finally said, I'm sick and tired of watching cable TV, cable news. It's a waste of money. I don't watch much in the way of regular TV or even cable TV. I use the streaming services like Netflix and Hulu, and I'll search for movies on archive.org and other websites, and I'll watch movies from there. And that's it. Or I'll occasionally go to the theater. There's a very good one coming up on HBO. HBO's streaming service, for example, that I want to watch. Oh God, I forget the name of it, but it actually looked pretty good. It's called DMZ, and it's supposed to be on HBO Max, and it's supposed to be on later this month. I'll watch that. It's a hell of a lot more interesting than what they have on regular cable TV. Let me tell you something. So now it brings me to the point, what YouTubers do I like? Because these YouTube programs are often places that I get my news and commentary on, because they report news that just are not discussed in the mainstream media. And there's a handful of them. And it's not that I support everything they stand for either. Let's start out with Endernax. His real name is Alex. He lives somewhere in the West Coast. In the past, I've been trying to reach out to him to interview him in this program, because I think Endernax is to the closest to me politically and economically, and that's out there, really. He doesn't post as many videos as he used to. Apparently, he has been focusing, much to his credit, on self-improvement and developing a relationship he has with his fiancée, and really becoming more self-sufficient in the production of his own food and working on all sorts of different projects related to the outdoors and housing and whatnot. So he's becoming much more into the lives of homesteading and self-sufficiency. Endernax, I would say, is one of my favorite commentators on YouTube. Endernax, he is into an ideology that's very eclectic, that's like mine. A dash of social democracy with economic nationalism. He is a strong civic nationalist. He is for the preservation of He is basically for the preservation of life. He is pro-life, but unlike most pro-lifers, he's totally against the atomizing influences of laissez-faire capitalism and globalism. He is a traditionalist when it comes to social values, but without beating up on LGBTQ people and other non-mainstream lifestyles and preferences and whatnot. He is really outside the mainstream, and that's why I like him. He does not get into all of the sort of right-wing memes of culture wars, and he's not into basically collectively shitting all over the poor people, being a bunch of lazy fucks and everything, like what they do on Fox News and Ben Shapiro and all those other people, you know. And he's not he's not a tanky leftist. He's not a national socialist or neo-fascist. He's not for this sort of authoritarian state that says, you must do what the state wants or else we will kill you or put you into a camp. Endernax, I would say, is truly a radical centrist. He is very much similar to my radical civic nationalism, but not a carbon copy because we have some differences. I don't think he fully takes the threat of Russia seriously. Maybe he's changed his mind. Again, I take the view that the Cold War has never ended, that it's continued by Russia allied to China and various other governments and political movements abroad. So, I like Endernax. Be sure to like him on YouTube. Shout out to him. The next show that I'd like to describe, which is more of a news and commentary program, is called Breaking Points with Crystal Ball and Cigar and Jetty. Cigar and Jetty is a sort of right wing populist. He cut his teeth in mainline conservative movement, and then he branched out into Rising, uh, which is also another program on YouTube. And Crystal Ball cut her teeth in MSNBC. She has run for political office, I believe, either in the Senate, either for the Senate or the House. I believe in the state of Virginia. Um, that show gives you news from a perspective that is very anti-establishment. It's very civic nationalist. It's very populist, very critical of Wall Street financialization and all their games and the free trade agreements. They tend to not like American hyper interventionism in foreign wars. Um, they tend to not take the Russia threat seriously. Up until recently, where Cigar and Jetty recently had a video where he did a bit of a mea culpa about that, where he said, look, I was wrong. And he talked about how Russia indeed was a national security threat. RT Music Production. Hey there. Hey, thanks for listening. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the compliment. Good stuff. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate that. So I would definitely give a like on Breaking Points with Cigar and Jetty and Crystal Ball. They had a really, really good episode on how the inflation and the oil crisis that we're having, the energy crisis, it actually has nothing to do with us drilling or not drilling. It actually has to do with a lot of the financialization by the commodities markets and how that has distorted the prices. Because truth be told, we've been an oil exporter for some time. And why, let me ask you the question, why are we exporting oil without first satisfying our entire home market? You see, instead of the people saying Keystone Pipeline and all the rest of it, that's not a solution. The solution is, number one, we have to take a look at the overall scheme of our financialized Wall Street centric economy and how it dictates our economy. That needs to be undone within reason. And two, we need to consume our own energy sources first. That means before we start exporting oil, gas, petroleum products, crude oil, etc., coal, we need, or solar panels, we need to satisfy our home energy market and home energy needs first before exporting them. And Breaking Points has had some, in recent week or 2 weeks, has had some really good hard-hitting commentary on the inflation and the energy crisis that we are experiencing right now. So be sure to like Endernax, Endernax, as well as Breaking Points, and that's with Crystal Ball and Cigar and Jetty. Thirdly, Kyle Kolinsky. Now, I like Kyle Kolinsky's delivery. He's very down to earth. He throws in some humor there. I'm originally from Long Island, New York. He grew up in New Rochelle, New York, which is across from Long Island Sound. So I could kind of relate to his delivery mechanisms, and he'll pepper his commentary with some, profanity. But you can tell he's really into it. He really is sincere with his beliefs, and that he loves the American people and wants to see us develop into a better country. Kyle Kolinsky, Kyle, and then Kolinsky is Kulinski. Now, Kyle Kolinsky, he dubs himself on the left, and he is a left populist, and he gives really good, hard-hitting criticisms again on the destruction of American labor and the union movement, how the economy has become financialized to the detriment of the American worker and small and medium-sized businesses. He has talked a lot about our corruption, the political corruption as a result of the wealthy donors getting their way policy-wise on Capitol Hill and state capitals. He's very good when it comes to his critique of the free trade agreements. He is also very good delivery-wise, not only with his humor, but he also is very good because he is very concise with his points. He's like, boom, 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 boom. That's it. And he's been doing these YouTube videos and having his own YouTube channel for years and years and years and years. And he criticizes both the corporate right as well as the establishment, the corporate-oriented establishment of the Democratic Party. And sometimes he will criticize also the hard left, too. He has actually criticized the tankies recently, Caleb Maupin, for example, for being apologetics for the Russians. And he will concede that dictatorships like Venezuela are authoritarian. That is not something that the hard left will do. My biggest, I would say, and he's also not Marxist in the sense that he wants the wholesale destruction of the private economy. He is much more market-oriented within a social democratic framework. So he's pretty good in that. Where he's really, where I have concerns about Kyle Kolinsky, where I really, really disagree with him, is on foreign policy. While I am not a fan of the military-industrial complex simply because of the corruption and the massive overcharging of the American taxpayer and the revolving door between Pentagon generals and Pentagon civil servants and the military-industrial complex and whatnot. I have no problem with a strong military-industrial complex itself. We have to produce weapons, unfortunately. It's the way it is. We don't live in a nice playground here called the world stage. We need to have the most cutting-edge, high-tech, effective weapons to defend our country and, God forbid, pursue an offensive war. Okay, so we need to have that. We need to have the most up-to-date weaponry that our people can produce. So I have no problem with a military-industrial complex that is very strong. My issue, where I agree with Kyle again, is the corruption that occurs with that revolving door, the massive overcharging, which continues to get worse and worse. It actually got worse under Trump when he fired Shay Assad, who was one of the chief Pentagon negotiators, who has really made an effort to try and lower the prices of our weapons to help the taxpayers save money. And of course, Donald Trump, unfortunately did not drain the swamp in that area as well as many other areas. So the other thing is Kyle Kolinsky's foreign policy worldview was informed by Noam Chomsky. And Noam Chomsky, I have serious concerns about because he, in the past and the present, he has been apologetics for totalitarian, anti-American dictatorships, sometimes endorsing them like he did during the mid to late 1960s in the case of North Vietnam and whatnot, claiming they were building this nice socialist society. He did that also with the first rendition of Sandinista power from 1979 to 1990. During the 1980s, Chomsky also praised the Sandinista dictatorship. So I have my issues with Chomsky. He blames America for every problem in the world, and that is bullshit. America's Cold War policy is so inconsistent, unlike Chomsky, who says that it's just informed by multinational corporate business interests and the military industrial complex. Well, while we did oppose communism and used and aligned ourselves at times with really awful dictatorships, we've also aligned ourselves with communist dictatorships as well in the name of trade, détente, big business pressure. Look at the technology transfers to the Soviet Union, especially during the 1970s, for example. Look at the look at the trade preferences that we gave to some of the Eastern Bloc countries. I mean, and then we got sucked into communist disinformation by supporting China, Yugoslavia, Romania, in thinking that they were maverick communist powers, that they were independent of the Soviet Union, or a goal to, to engage in world domination. Well, no, Chomsky is wrong. And many of these governments, like in Iran or Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge, they didn't become anti-American merely because America, supported their enemies, their anti-communist enemies, or bombed their country into the Stone Age. No, the Khmer Rouge started out with a Stalinist Maoist ideology as far back as when Pol Pot and Khieu Samphan and Ieng Sari and others were studying in Paris, frickin' France, and other elite schools abroad, as well as within French Indochina. They embraced Stalinism. They were Stalinists by political conviction. Okay, Chomsky, you're wrong. Okay? So, Sandinistas, same thing. They were communists as far back as when one of its founders, Carlos Fonseca Amador, participated in the World Youth Festival in 1957 in Eastern Europe, became a communist. So our enemies don't become communists because they embrace, because of bombing campaigns by American forces, or just because America backed various anti-communist governments. Much of it is because they absorb by choice an ideology that is opposed to the United States and economic and political freedom. Okay, so that's what my biggest disagreement with Kyle Kolinsky is Kyle Kolinsky, he says it on the show, embraces Noam Chomsky. And America is not always and solely responsible for forcing these movements in the third world to embrace an anti-American socialist ideology. So that's where I disagree with Kyle Kolinsky. He does not talk really much about our geopolitical enemies and the threats. It's always military-industrial complex, and not about, well, we have threats abroad like Russia and China. And that's my biggest disagreement with Kyle Kolinsky's and foreign policy. But be sure to like his page or his YouTube channel, because he is really good on a lot of other issues, in my opinion. The last person I would say that I definitely respect to a degree is David Pakman. David Pakman is one of those few on the left that actually will go out there and hit the tankies and the apologetics for anti-American dictatorships and saying, look, they really should not be a part of the left. They're not good reflections of the left, that they're authoritarian dictatorships that suppress liberties, that they're anti-American and whatnot. And he'll be very critical of Cuba, Venezuela, China, Russia. He'll be very critical of the enemies of Israel. This is David Pakman. David Pakman is also a bit of a social democrat. He has done videos I believe called Why He's Not a Socialist. He is for a form of capitalism. Where I disagree, I guess, with David Pakman is I think he, look, it's his channel. He can do whatever he wants. But I think he's gotten caught up with the anti-Trump mania to the detriment of a lot of other issues that are really hitting and hurting the American people. I think with David Pakman, he has done kind of a 360 on the issue of free trade. Before Trump came to the fore and became president of the United States, David Pakman produced a video commentary that was very critical of free trade. But he has done a reverse 360 on that. And now he has kind of swallowed a lot of the Cato Institute critiques of protectionism and economic nationalism. And that is really unfortunate. So to recap this video, I know I gave a lot of commentary and and whatnot. But my most favorite YouTube podcasts are Endernax, Breaking Points, Kyle Kolinsky, David Pakman. Not to say I disagree, that I agree with everything they stand for, but I respect their views. I try to get news and commentary from them. Again, Endernax, David Pakman, Kyle Kolinsky, David Pakman, and one more I forgot. Definitely got to plug them in. America's Survival, Roku TV. Their YouTube channel is USA Survival, and that's hosted by Cliff Kincaid. And back in the past, it was also co-hosted by Jerry Kenny, who's down here in Florida, Daytona Beach. And Cliff Kincaid, I respect on foreign policy. He provides the best commentary out there on national security issues. He's one of the few American conservatives that has a YouTube program that is highly critical of our national security stance. He is concerned about the threat of Russia and China. He believes, like I do, that the Cold War never ended in 1991. He has also been critical of the conservative movement because of they're funded by big business and overly wedded to corporate capitalism. He's very critical of how libertarians and conservative establishment organizations in the Republican Party are for or were for trade with China, communist China, and Putin's Russia. He has been very critical, of course, and he's been very cognizant of the threat of a domestic Marxist and far left organizations in the United States. And he is even in one or two programs has actually branched out and has formed not quite a united front, but he actually shared the same airwaves on a YouTube program with a fellow from the Institute for Policy Studies on how during the pandemic, the super wealthy were getting even more richer at the expense of the poor people. He understands. Cliff Kincaid has populist tendencies. He's a civic nationalist, I would say. He understands that libertarianism and establishment conservatism is really failing. That is fraught with a lot of problems. And Cliff I've been on his show a number of times since I think about 2013, 2014. Personally, he's a great guy to work with. He's very pleasant. He's very professional whenever I've talked to him on air. I mean, there are things I disagree with him too. You can never agree with somebody 100%. But, you know, I can't speak. I think I need another swig of coffee here. Cheers, everyone. Cliff Kincaid is first class. I like him personally, professionally, and I like a lot of what he stands for on national security, even economics too, as well. Again, make sure you like also USA Survival on YouTube. Excellent program. That's a go-to program for national security issues and the threat of radical Islamic and communist subversion. Thank you all. I see one like here. A couple of people were listening. Appreciate it. And I'm going to be doing a couple of more live streams because I have some time to kill right now, and we'll be discussing a couple of more topics. See you soon. Have a great day.